Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach will perhaps go down in history as one of the most notable game releases of all time. Just perhaps not for the reasons they wanted. After nearly 2 years, the free DLC, Ruin, has finally released. Perhaps Steelwool's final chance to convince the many people who would be against buying another full-price game to stick around. This serves as an ultimate test of sorts, so will Steelwool stick the landing? Will Ruin live up to the hype? And will you like and subscribe? Please. This is Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach Ruin Retrospect. That title needs shortening, hold on. There we go. FNAF Ruin Retrospective. Much better. Before we get into the game, let's take a look at the build-up to release. The history of teasers and trailers. Off the bat, Ruin takes a very different approach from Security Breach in how it has chosen to market itself. The most striking difference being how little teasing was actually done for it before its actual release. Most likely due to the amount of promised and under-delivered content from the initial Security Breach trailers. I imagine Steelwool wanted to avoid a retread of that. So we really only have the initial teaser and the trailer, but before that, the first evidence we had that something more was in the works were from these screenshots, and eventually a codename was even discovered. That name being Chowda, which is pretty mysterious. Naturally, this got the rumor mill churning, but with not much else to go on, all we could really do is wait. Although we wouldn't have to wait long. On May 30th, 2022, the DLC was officially announced with this teaser poster and a name to boot. Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach Ruin. But for the sake of brevity, we'll just be calling it Ruin from now on. Now this poster did offer some interesting points of theorizing alone, including a destroyed Pizzaplex, still kicking yet very much so Shattered Chica, and what appears to be a new protagonist. On top of this, these eerie red eyes hover in the corner of the image. Most importantly though, this teaser confirmed something that would become dreadfully important, that this DLC was indeed free. Now regardless of your actual thoughts on the game, it's an undeniable fact that the general audience certainly wasn't stoked on it. But this DLC gives them the chance to make up for that to some extent, by putting a better foot forward. Of course, most people who didn't like the original game are unlikely to pay for the expansion, based solely on the hope it would improve their experience. So making it free removes that huge hurdle, making it much more likely they will come in to check it out. But with this teaser, we wouldn't have much for some time. There was an interview in November with GameJolt where the developers stated they wanted to make the DLC more scary, which is certainly a good sign. But overall we had a year of relative radio silence. That is until May of the following year when we got the first major gameplay trailer. This trailer was actually pretty damn good, which shouldn't come as too much of a surprise since Security Breach also had plenty of great trailers. But this one showed some real promise. This time all of the animatronics look shattered and demolished, adding to that horror vibe, and the trailer for the DLC releasing very close alongside the trailer for the upcoming film, it made for a great boost in interest. All eyes were on Steelwool and the FNAF franchise, and with the release date finally revealed at the ending of the trailer, well, sort of, it was finally time to see what they had been cooking up. After another 2 months of radio silence with us only actually having a release a month, so not really a full date, they didn't end up giving us an exact day until about 2 weeks out, which was cutting it a bit close. But hey, it's finally here. Hey. So, one of my biggest gripes with Security Breach was its confusing and lackluster story. One that just preferred to not explain the most basic elements and then say it was all for the mystery. Like, no, that's just poor writing. So, how are we faring here? Well, our story begins with a little blurb on the main menu. Gregory is missing and presumably somewhere inside the Pizzaplex. We follow a new protagonist, as promised by the original teaser image, in the form of Cassidy. She, like Gregory, is a young child, meaning that they don't have to change too much about her to make her playable. Although in comparing the two, they do actually have slightly different stats, from running to jumping. But overall, she functions basically the same. As she comes up to the precipice of this clearly long abandoned entrance to the Mega Pizzaplex, she calls out for Gregory, and is annoyed that he isn't here to greet her. She explores a bit, collecting a flashlight along the way before we find the Roxy walkie-talkie. It is here that we hear what we can only assume to be Gregory's voice, telling us to find him. He's trapped under Roxy racers. and something dragged him in. From here, we have a clear goal: find and save Gregory. So with that, we set out. After nearly being decapitated by a rogue elevator, we find ourselves encountering a deactivated Chica with a little bit of gunk in her mouth. She doesn't seem to still be functional, although Cassie seems a bit noticeably shocked and even saddened by this sight. Has she perhaps had some sort of interaction with them in the past? Well, no time for theorizing, because as we continue on, that melancholy is replaced with fear when a very much so still alive Monty comes crawling out of the pipes and attempts to turn us into his Saturday morning brunch. Or would it be supper? Brupper? Yeah, let's go with that. After narrowly avoiding him by skillfully falling on our asses into a deep watery pit, we find ourselves spat out in Monty's Gator Gulf, where the majority of the first chapter will preside. Oh yeah, this game has chapters, by the way. Sorry, that intro might have been a bit bombastic. I'm just excited. Anyway, we continue on before...
Hi, free mask. Take a mask. Take a mask. Take a mask.
Okay.
Still have to hold
Thank
the
you.
button to
Please
collect.
enjoy.
Weird. It's not a Bonnie mask. Look at all
It's
the
got
wires and
technology.
stuff.
Yeah, that happens. We take the familiar mask and find that everything is not as it seems. By placing the mask on, we find ourselves in a digital world, full of digital style and the such. Apparently, this is a mask used by staff at the Pizzaplex to repair stuff, which could be the proof we need to finally settle the Vanny is Vanessa debate. It was clearly the mimic all along. Case closed. Also, can we talk about how this thing is like drilling a hole into Cassie's brain or something? It's like Elon Musk's Neuralink, but without the Tesla explosion. So, probably safer. But, point being, we get a Vanny mask that makes things go bloopy bleep. After getting acquainted with it in some tutorial areas, we make our way through the dark and dingy course, carefully avoiding the ravenous Monty, who is hot on our heels, and... hold on, I gotta play some golf. Anyway, we make our way some more before we get attacked by a lean, mean, giant enemy bunny. We don't know who this is yet, but just some sort of malicious entity hacking the software of the mask. Anyway, we keep on our merry way until we are able to walk through a TV screen using the mask, which kinda cements that there's some weird stuff going on as we end up being teleported halfway across the map to the daycare, which transitions us nicely into... Ah yes, the daycare. A pristine location known for... No, definitely not you. Oh god. Mommy, I want to go home. But if you shared that sentiment, then I'm sorry to break it to you, but things just got a lot creepier from here. We start by entering the daycare's play place, where we encounter a ruined Moon. He grabs our hand, but is startled by our flashlight and runs off like a rat in the sewers, cementing that he will once again be the main threat inside the daycare. Supposedly. However, we also see Sun, who requests our help. Anyway, we run about and activate a bunch of generators, which all activate lights shining directly at Moon, keeping him stunned. There is a node located in the back of his head that we have to activate, and as we do, he turns into something new. Not day or night, but Eclipse, sort of a merging of the two personalities into a much more stable and seemingly kind character. Clearly what was originally intended to be the daycare attendant in-universe, no doubt. After we, I guess, save him, we are let back out of the daycare and allowed to continue on our quest by Eclipse. This is where things really get dangerous, however, as we encounter a horde of deactivated bear endoskeletons, likely having poured out from the basement area below where they were previously present, which is a nice bit of consistency with the previous game. We again search around for more nodes, which, yeah, get used to hearing that a lot, but as we do, more and more of these bear endos come alive. Eventually, we make our way to the main theater, only to encounter... that? Dear Lord. Anyway, we climb into its mouth, yeah, and continue on to... Here, Cassie finds herself transported to Gator Gulf, specifically a part of Gator Gulf we didn't see before. The ride that these trolleys go on before entering the main overhead area. Here they show a story depicting, through cutouts of the animatronics, of how Monty usurped Bonnie as the lead guitarist, offering a first proper canon look at glam rock Bonnie, albeit in a cartoonized form on these cutouts. This then transitions us into a more familiar overhead area to Gator Gulf, but in a much more ruined form. Who would have guessed? We make our way through doing, oh, we're gonna love this, more nodes. This time, however, experiencing some new aspects of the AR world. Now, we already saw some crazy stuff with it, but here we get a glimpse at actual areas being built within the software of sorts, such as this tunnel where Helpy supposedly locks away the entity from tracking us. Doubt it'll last, but it does offer some safety throughout the rest of the chapter. Aside from this, there isn't too much to say. We find our way out at the end and continue onward to reach Roxy Raceway. We continue into the bakery area, where, shocker, we encounter Chica. However, shortly after arriving, we see the entity, back in action, this time with a new type of device called an AR inhibitor.
This card is useless.
This device prevents us from using the Vanny mask and entering VR, so until we can get to it and deactivate it, we are stuck like this. Man, whatever this thing is, it really doesn't want us using VR, does it? Whatever. After a quick runabout sequence with Shattered Chica, we continue on and turn off the inhibitor. Also going back a second, the cupcake is alive! Okay, moving on. Next, we find ourselves in another one of those AR rooms, only this time the tables are turned from our earlier visit. Whereas we were safe the last time thanks to Helpy taking out the entity, he is unable to do so now, and we have to rush our way through before it can get us. Also, it's giant now. This game is teasing me with a lot of giant things, and that gives me hope we'll see my boy again. After escaping, we finally reach Roxy Raceway, or at least the salon that's near it, bringing us into... Upon arriving, we see the completely destroyed Roxy crying in the corner. Cassie expresses audible sorrow for this creature, resulting in her being enraged. Gregory calls out to us from afar, however, luring her away. Anyway, you know the drill. Nodes, 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 and finally we make it to the back area. Here, a Shattered Monty attempts to hurt us from the water, as we precariously make our way across these platforms floating in it, but we toast his roboticized backside and continue unimpeded into Roxy Raceway. Finally, we are here. We alert Gregory that we've arrived, but we don't get a response. No signal, maybe? Roxy's out and about hunting for us now, so we use audio lures to make her create a path for us. Specifically, audio lures of Gregory, who is someone she very clearly wants to rip limb from limb. Guess I can't blame her, though. After narrowly avoiding vehicular manslaughter, I said narrowly avoiding. There we go. We are caught by Roxy, who screams at us to give her back her eyes. This startles Cassie, causing her to scream, which causes Roxy to immediately back off, saying she is sorry and experiencing an error? Interesting. It's almost as if Roxy recognizes us somehow. And now that I think about it, Cassie seems to have some love for her in particular, which is shown through item descriptions and just overall care. There might be more of a connection between these two than we initially thought. Cassie's in a bad state right now, begging for Gregory to respond to her, which he thankfully does. Apparently he's gotten himself stuck under Roxy Raceway. Cassie suggests finding the police, but Gregory tells her this is a bad idea as he continues to guide her under. Until we can do that, however, we have two more locations to visit, Bonnie Bowl and Fazer Blast. We begin by going to Bonnie Bowl, where a horde of creepy, crawly music men are waiting. There was never just one. A fact we learn in the flesh as these things stalk us around. In hordes. But as we maneuver our way through, we can find a particular secret waiting for us. At least, assuming we decide to go full Undertale genocide route and take up the game on murdering all these little sign bots that have been sprinkled throughout the game up until now. If you do this up until this point, you will notice an area open up here, which, if you follow it, leads you to none other than Glamrock Bonnie's corpse. You can't do anything with it, it's just here. But it does create a very interesting sight, and finally gives us a look at his model. But continuing with the story, we find a vent that takes us down to... familiar room. An arcade cabinet with a glitchy yellow sword sticking out of it. An old bed. Someone has been living here. This is Vanny's hideout, and with the addition of the sword and the destroyed cabinet, we have confirmation for which ending Security Breach follows up. The Vanny ending. AKA the ending where Greg and Fred go to save/stop Vanny. Freddy's destroyed, but we go through and complete the third Princess Quest game, destroying the dark influence over Vanny and saving her. Greg and Vanny leave with Freddy's head intact, leaving behind the Pizzaplex. We thought for good. This ending is further cemented as canon when we enter Blast and find Freddy's destroyed, damaged body lying alone and in wait at the center. It gets up and begins to chase us, its stomach forming a mouth with teeth and rigid scraps of metal, meaning we better get moving. We escape him and make our way into a vent. We are chased by a mini Music Man, and we pop out in some more back hallways as we make our way back to Roxy Raceway. Chapter 9. Gregory makes contact with us. Cassie tells him that we've deactivated all the nodes, only for Gregory to tell us there is still one left. Inside Roxy. As he says this, his voice sounds extra weird. Kinda glitchy. Probably just the talkie, though. This then leads to a moment where Cassie has to go up to Roxy, who has been crushed under a felled forklift. We finally get to know why Cassie likes Roxy so much, and why Roxy was so against hurting Cassie earlier. As it turns out, Cassie had one of her birthday parties here before. Apparently no one showed up, so it was just her and Roxy the whole time. The two must have bonded to some extent then. Roxy still has Cassie saved in her database and says that she remembers her, leading to the heartbreaking moment where Cassie has to take off her faceplate and deactivate Roxy, killing her. Cassie continues into the all-too-familiar sinkhole. Down, down, and downer still. Strange caves and the newfound entrance through the side where that giant Freddy head lays in the rubble. We continue onward to a strange cabin, laying here, alone. If you had collected enough fast tokens up to this point, then you can insert them into a barely functional Candy Cadet unit and hear an interesting story. The story tells of a mother and a young boy who lived out in the woods. They were being haunted by a monster until the mother was able to lock it up in the basement. The boy could hear the monster and was scared of it, but the mother soothed him with a lullaby. This happened enough times that the monster learned to sing or mimic the lullaby. And one day, when the mother was out, it sang the lullaby, tricking the young boy into opening the door that trapped it. A story all too familiar. Cassie proceeds to open a door. We see the entity that has been tailing us this whole time dissipate before us. And after breaking through the final layers of security, we open it. A door housing what we thought to be Gregory, following a familiar song to a gruesome twist. Gregory was not Gregory. Meet the Mimic. First set up in the Tales of the Pizzaplex novels, this strange creature has the ability to mimic other voices it hears, and often tries to find ways to take the form of something else as well through costumes. This is the being that was pulling all of the strings. The surprise Afton appearance at the ending of Security Breach was none other than the Mimic. The very being hacking technology to convince Fanny to do her bidding was merely taking that form to do so, all in an attempt to free itself. And now it finally has. First it aims to destroy us, but before it can, Roxy jumps in and saves us, telling us to run. We go outside of the room and finally hear who is supposedly the real Gregory. He tells us we were tricked and that we need to run. We run, the Mimic hot in our tails. As we reach an elevator, Gregory tells us that the entity we have been seeing this whole time was none other than a security system designed by Gregory and Vanny to stop people from freeing the Mimic. This is the Mixus entity, but now there is nothing stopping the Mimic from walking out the way we came in. Now, it is free. As he tells us this, he also tells us he can't risk being followed and apologizes. He apologizes as the wires holding the elevator snap, and the game ends with Cassie screaming as we crash down. Deeper, deeper, and deeper still. That is FNAF Ruin. Or at least one ending. See, this may not come as a surprise, but like Security Breach, Ruin has multiple endings. 3 to be exact. With this being the main one, that most people will experience first. Next is another, rather simple one to get. Going the wrong way during the final chase can show you this screen. A pristine scene, but also not one to be trusted given Cassie's worried breathing playing over top. And then the third and probably most interesting ending. Throughout the game, whenever we use the cameras, we've had the ability to zoom out in a display of usable cameras, a largely useless feature. All of the ones you need are always within reach. But if you do this on 4 specific cameras throughout the game, in chapters 1, 3, 5, and 7, you will see a secret camera. Looking at them, it isn't too much. It is clearly the pizzeria buried below the pizzaplex, but nothing happens on them. But if you click on and view each of these cameras and then go back to the final fight, you get this. I don't even think I tried to open it before. I was like, oh yeah, there's 2 paths. Go right. What?
Whoa,
What?
No, yeah, you got it.
What?
It was
What
supposed
was
to play
that?
the whole...
What was that?
Yep.
What was that? What the fuck was that?
It's the Mimic.
That's like an actual mascot costume. That's scary.
Yep. Just keep going.
Why can't I just close the door on it?
Yeah, close the door.
Is this it?
I think
No?
you press that button.
What? Oh, he's scooping it? That looks like a scooper. Oh my god. That is horrifying.
Especially you're horrifying when you, like, do those things to children.
A patchwork costume with pieces taken from other sources, stitched together in a way I can only assume is meant to mimic Gregory, with the blue shirt and the hair. The Mimic quite literally tried to build himself a Gregory costume. A neat detail. Anyway, this also unlocks the door here, and allows you to get a different ending where you use the Scooper to presumably kill the Mimic. A nice ending, but very likely not canon. And again, we said that about all the non-animated endings in Security Breach as well, and I guess look how that turned out, so who knows? So, we've discussed the story and history, but now the big one. What is the gameplay like? Well, as I mentioned in the story section, it does use a familiar loop throughout, but not one familiar to Security Breach. We are tasked with deactivating nodes. This requires finding the children items and using the mask and then completing the mini-puzzle. This loop sounds repetitive when I explain it out loud, but the game does a surprisingly good job of innovating it and adding new challenges throughout to make it feel fresh. There was never a moment where I actively found myself bored or angry by the gameplay loop. It starts out simple, sure, but that's because it's still teaching you. However, the inclusion of the mask introduces a through line of a threat. The longer you wear the mask, the more likely it is that Mexis will show up to get you. So most of the time you will be constantly taking the mask on and off. With the introduction of the AR blockers, however, you lose this ability. You can get stuck in the mask and be forced to work under a time limit, like what happens in Phaser Blast. Aside from this, you'll have a different threat like the Endos forcing you to be aware of the order you do them in, or the Music Man requiring you to lure them around to create a path forward. Aside from this loop, you've also got plenty of chase scenes, exploration segments, and lots of walking. It is a modern-day mascot horror game, after all. At least Cassie got her steps in. There are plenty of collectibles to be found, key items which are fairly straightforward, as well as digital and real-world collectibles. The AR ones are similar to the last game's collectibles, useless beyond completionism, and to my knowledge there are no power-up items like there were last time. Although the inclusion of Cassie's specific thoughts on these items does offer some nice characterization, which I appreciate. It teases stuff like her connection with Roxy early, which is fun. It's the real-world collectibles where things get more interesting. First is the comic pages. These take a similar style to the comic endings from the previous game, seemingly confirming elements from each ending are indeed canon. Maybe? Or maybe not. Including Burn Trap and the Blob, or Tangle, or whatever it's called now. There are 8 pages to be found. Side note, but the Blob is visible in this game in a single moment. Take that as you will. The other collectible is the Phas tokens, I mentioned before, which can be spent on Candy Cadet. There are 7 in total. Aside from this, there are the wet floor signs, which can be deactivated, that unlock the secret Bonnie room, and the secret cameras that unlock the Scooper ending. Finally, there are 2 arcade cabinets you can do. One gives you Chica's voice box, and the other gives you nothing. but these don't actually affect anything, besides the voice box, which can be used on Chica to give her voice back.
Am I really doing this? Ew. Gross. That should do it.
This does confirm, I guess, that the Burn Trap ending isn't canon, as Freddy doesn't have this upgrade, meaning he didn't get both Chica and Monty, meaning he couldn't get into the sinkhole, but we already knew this from Fazer Blast, so it's not anything major. Just a nice bit of consistency. Although I'm not sure how Chica's voice box ended up inside the cabinet. Aside from this, it's just the main gameplay loop as already discussed. It might be the same collectathon walking simulator game that a lot of other mascot horrors are in the surface, but this one differentiates itself through the addition of more enemies in the actual puzzle sequence, and the Mixus entity being an ever-present threat, which actually brings a sense of tension and fear to every encounter with it, even if you are relatively safe most of the time. So I think it stands a step above a lot of the others because of this. Given its completely linear state, you will rarely find yourself getting lost, like in Security Breach. The game keeps you moving and always has something new to show off, which keeps it exciting throughout. The runtime is also much shorter, with the game being entirely beatable within 2 to 3 hours if you know what you're doing. Aside from this, there are some bugs, such as Roxy's glitched hitbox here and there, and a few other things, but overall it's a much more complete experience than Security Breach, which, to this day, is still a buggy mess. Most of the time, you kind of have to go looking for these bugs yourself, which is a good thing. The biggest one I've seen online is where if you miss a wet floor sign the first time through, and upon replaying the chapter, you cannot deactivate it as the game bugs out and does it for you, but without counting it for you, meaning the Bonnie secret is inaccessible in the save file and you have to start all the way over from the beginning of the game. Hopefully this one gets patched, because I can imagine this will cause a lot of pain for people. Side note, dear God, poor Markiplier. I mean, you've got eyes. This game just looks as good as Security Breach, which is, to say, pretty good. This opening scene in particular is really impressive with the daylight peeking through the shattered windows. I love it. The virtual world also allows for a ton of creativity in the visuals and the weird glitchiness. Sound-wise, it's all on point. The game has the returning soundtrack of Alan Simpson with a couple new tracks sprinkled in, although most of the tracks are just recompositions from the past game's songs. Also, we got the brilliant return of the best Security Breach song, the arcade theme, and some are new, mainly used for cutscenes and cinematic moments. Each chase scene has its own theme, and overall it's a great addition to the Security Breach soundtrack. So we've talked about everything there is to offer. Now it's time for me to discuss my thoughts on the DLC. Overall, I had a great time with it. From the massive improvement over Security Breach to the far more coherent story that works to retroactively fix a lot of things about Security Breach I disliked. Getting a lot of Dark Revival vibes from this. Although it isn't all peaches and rainbows, as there are a few things I want to talk about that I wasn't too keen on. Notably, the multiple endings. Yeah, it's satisfying to complete all the requirements and get all the creepy costume stuff, but why did we need 3 endings when 2 of them are just not going to end up being canon? I feel like the elevator ending will be the canon one, with the theory I will delve into in the next chapter, but it just feels weird to keep sticking the multiple ending format when you could just combine these 3 into one ending. First of all, start with him in the costume. Then we get to the scooper part. It doesn't work, but maybe it rips the costume off and we continue the chase with the bear mimic. Then we continue into the elevator. Maybe once we're in there we see flashes of the one-screen ending, and then end it in the same way as the main ending goes anyway. Have your cake and eat it too. Anyway, aside from all this, I also think there's a lot of missed opportunities. Mainly, this guy? Where was he? I felt like they were really setting up his return with the constant teases of giant animatronics and the multi-music man sequence having a mysterious thumping in the background that I thought was him. Not to mention he was one of the best parts of the first game, and the only main animatronic not to reappear. I don't know, not really a bad thing per se, but disappointed for me at least. Then again, maybe it's a good thing they kept their scope small and manageable. I would not want another Security Breach situation, so overall I'm content with the final package. It took and listened to the criticism that Security Breach received, which is a definitive plus, and it really did try its best to improve on everything, with it succeeding in a lot of ways. While it feels a bit off to continue from an ending that was very clearly not the originally planned canon conclusion to Security Breach, I'm fine with that too, because the Burn Trap ending still makes no sense. But with Ruin finally being the win for the FNAF community needed, what comes next? So this is a fairly new segment, but I wanted to take a second to theorize about what could come next for the franchise. Now, of course, the easy answer is Help Wanted 2 and the movie, both of which are confirmed and coming out later this year. But that's not what I meant. Not really, at least. I want more specifically. Where will the plot go? How will VR2 continue this game, and what could we see in the next mainline FNAF game? Well, I've got a few theories. So let's start with the simple one. I believe the elevator ending is canon for 2 reasons. 1, the Mimic is still alive and now free. It can get out. This means the Mimic can very easily become the new mainline villain of the franchise in the way that Vanny couldn't, which I'm all here for. I love this guy, he's terrifying. Well, I was very hesitant at first about his inclusion, even at the beginning of my stream going on a rant about how I hope he isn't in it. As I was worried mainly about the need to read a bunch of homework books to get the plot, I actually don't think that's much of a worry. At least, not a new one, I guess. Everything you need to know about the Mimic is explained here. It's a robot, it's evil, it's likely behind everything bad that happened in Security Breach, and we have a better understanding of its powers. It can mimic a voice down to the exact inflections, and will go to great lengths to take on a visual appearance similar to that person. It is clearly intelligent to some degree, and while its motives are still a mystery, this is something that can be easily fleshed out in the next game. But, what is the next game we will see him in? Oh, that's easy. Help Wanted 2. The second reason I believe the elevator ending is canon is because of this.
I know you did it for me. To save me. But we can't risk being followed. I'm sorry.
Gregory? No!
Welcome back for another week of career fulfillment and minimal social interaction. We know how challenging it can be.
I think it's going to be a direct continuation. Specifically, I think the entire game, or at least most of it, will be set in the AR world of the Vanny mask. Simulating the realities of Sister Location and Pizzeria Simulator, we already know that the Mimic can hack and attack, so it could be possible he's manipulating all of this. Maybe he wants to use Cassie to get to Gregory in some way. In fact, I think the Mimic's specific goals right now are to find and kill Gregory. Something that's established in the books, and I imagine will be explained in the game if this does end up being the direction they go, is that the Mimic will learn and copy behaviors. For instance, the way the Mimic lures Cassie into the trap to freeing him is likely the same way Gregory lured him into the traps to begin with. Likely Vanessa concreted over the door, while Gregory lured him in. This theory is supported by handprints on a vent nearby the room that the Mimic is trapped in, as well as Gregory's bag and walkie-talkie being left behind in the room. So Mimic copied this and used it to lure Cassie in. We also know the Mimic must have been watching Gregory throughout all of Security Breach. This is why we see footage from that game playing on screens throughout the Pizzaplex in Ruin, and why the Mimic directly copies some of his lines of dialogue. I don't know if I'd go as far as to say that he wants to kill and replace Gregory, but it is possible that when he mimics someone real, he will be more inclined to kill that person than others in an attempt to keep his cover of sorts safe. The books establish he does this due to a programming malfunction his creator tried to destroy him, which taught him violence, and some fast technicians tried to reprogram him to rip out endoskeleton limbs, which resulted in him using those techniques on humans as well. So clearly the Mimic is learning a collection of things and mashing them together. So what is one other major element that the Mimic likely had time to copy? Well, none other than William Afton. Inspired by his killings, the Mimic has reached a precipice, and not even seeing the original motives that Afton had at one point, merely wanting to sow death and destruction on a mass scale. An AI murder machine. This is the main threat of FNAF going forward, and I think we can see it expanded on even more in future games. I think after Help Wanted 2, we might see another game in a similar style to both Security Breach and Ruin. Maybe taking some open world elements from Security, but finding a more streamlined way to push the player along certain paths, like in Ruin. A happy medium. I think this will become the main gameplay style of FNAF games going forward, while VR games will follow a similar style to classic Click Team games, like in the VR game we've already got. But honestly, who knows what could be next for the franchise? It's FNAF. FNAF turns 10 years old next year, so surely something big is coming then. 2023 has already been massive, but I can't see why they wouldn't save some of these big releases for the big 1-0 if they didn't already have something massive planned. So mark my words, by August of 2024, we will either know or perhaps even have something huge. Probably a new game, since by that point Help Wanted 2 will have presumably been out for at least 8 months, if not more, assuming it doesn't get delayed. FNAF is one of those franchises that never really skips a year, I guess except last year, and while I do hope they don't try to bite off more than they can chew, or try to rush anything out, it's clear that Stillwell is large enough to work on multiple titles at once. So what could this mystery title be? I hesitate to say it will be another full-scale game in the vein of a Security Breach or Ruin-style game, but at the same time, Help Wanted will have just come out as well. Maybe something smaller scale in production, like another Click Team level game developed solely by Scott? Although that's unlikely, as he seems to be slowly stepping back from being the primary developer of these games. So honestly, I don't know. Most of my confidence in saying that there will be something just comes from the fact that they could have easily waited to release or announce Help Wanted 2 until then. But from what we've seen, it's being marketed as a release for this year. Surely they wouldn't let the big 10-year anniversary go to waste. So, while I can't make any concrete predictions on what we will see, I can confidently say that it'll be something worth noting. Worst case scenario, we'll at least get some kind of massive announcement for the next movie or game or something, but I'm holding out hope. Anyway, that's about everything I've got to predict for the future of FNAF. I'm probably way off, but we'll see. So for the final segment, I wanted to turn the mic over to you guys, and have you guys tell me what you thought of Ruin. Over on my community tab, I asked you guys for your thoughts on Ruin. This is another fairly new segment I'm trying out, so if you're interested in sharing your thoughts on future games or movies or what have you I might cover next, then subscribe and hit that bell to be notified when I post. Anyway, enough shameless advertising. Raving Rabid Lover 5967 says,
overall, I genuinely had a great time with Ruin. There was this one annoying semi-constant glitch involving the mini Music Man hordes, but aside from that, I had a great time. The only thing I didn't like was that we couldn't fix all the animatronics. Aside from the daycare attendant, and very briefly and optionally with Chica, there's nothing the player can do, to my knowledge, to befriend everyone.
This one brings up an interesting point. They tease us with the idea of being able to save the animatronics, but we really only do that with Eclipse and Roxy. And then you can give Chica her music box, but it's hidden behind some pretty weird steps most players probably won't do, and doesn't actually offer any sort of conclusion for our character beyond a reused voice clip. I will say I do like how we don't really redeem Monty. In my eyes, he was very much so the one that killed Bonnie, and has presumably even been gunning for Freddy's position. Monty's the closest thing out of the main man to an actual villain, albeit most of this comes from theories and guesswork. I think perhaps giving some more concrete evidence that Monty is beyond saving could have justified his death he got, because conceptually I see where they were going with this, but as it stands I'm not quite sure that comes across. Aside from him, I also think we could have seen at least some kind of acknowledgement of DJ Music Man, but I've already divulged my thoughts on that earlier, and it's not like he really needed to be saved, given he's quite chill by the ending of Security Breach, so I won't blather on about it anymore. XKVQ9740 says,
mid.
I mean, I see where you're coming from. I personally really enjoyed it, but I also have plenty of gripes with the game as mentioned before. Not every game is going to be everyone's taste, and considering this game has been receiving loads of praise from all corners of the internet, it's fair to go in expecting more than perhaps what it is that Ruin is even offering. Overall, I think this will go down as one of the more interestingly viewed games in the series. Being a DLC to one of the most controversial games in the series, pretty much sure it would be. But even on its own merits, it offers a ton of interesting discussion to truly warrant its own conversation. Ruin has perhaps cemented the future of FNAF going forward, so in some ways I think it's even more important than Security Breach. So it'll be very interesting to see where the franchise goes from here, story or gameplay-wise. But what about you? What would you like to see next for the franchise? More specifically, what would your dream FNAF game be? Maybe a return to the Click Team gameplay style, or something more inspired by the open world of Security Breach? Whatever it may be, let me know down below. I imagine it'll lead to some fun conversations. Anyway, with that, I will begin to wrap this video up. It's already taken longer to get this out than was originally planned due to IRL stuff going on, but I hope you enjoyed. Consider leaving a like and subscribing to see what I've got coming to this channel next. Hope to see you around. Ciao!
Get up! Get up! Ah!
The man who gets retired is a man who ain't funny no more.